This is Outbreak News This Week, brought to you by the Global Dispatch Incorporated. Outbreak News This Week is your source for all the news about worms and germs. And now, your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com. Here's Robert Harriman.
Well, hello, Tampa Bay, and welcome to Outbreak News This Week, your source for all the news about worms and germs. My name's Robert, and I appreciate you listening. And I want to encourage you to check out the website, OutbreakNewsToday.com, OutbreakNewsToday.com, for your daily dose of infectious disease and outbreak news. Well, on today's show, I want to really start out with a question, right? And it comes from an article in USA Today by Ashley May. And I have previously covered the measles outbreak in Madagascar, the island right off the coast of East Africa, where they got, somewhere in the ballpark of 70,000 measles cases since October and getting close to 1,000 fatalities, right? So in her title in USA Today, she writes, 900 people died of measles in Madagascar. Could that happen in the U.S.? And I'd like to go ahead and address that real briefly. Is it possible? Yeah, but probably not. And there's some important caveats with this. One is in the U.S. While measles can be a very serious disease, in the U.S. our vaccination rate for measles, mumps, and rubella is in the ballpark of over 90%. Overall, we're pretty well vaccinated. Not where we should be, but we're pretty good. And so just that fact alone would tell us that there wouldn't be thousands and thousands of measles cases, right? You would think. In Madagascar, the vaccination rate is somewhere in the ballpark of 50 to 60%. So it's not a big surprise that it's spreading like wildfire in Madagascar. And, another important thing to think about is the different healthcare and nutrition situations between the two countries. We're well fed, right? We have good nutrition. And if you did come down with measles, while there's no treatment for it, there's no curative medicine. We have, fantastic supportive care, and it's a very, very rare thing that we see a measles fatality here in this country. And I would venture to say that it's probably somewhat different in Madagascar, hence all the fatalities, including, a lot of them in children. So we just have a better healthcare, supportive care, medicine structure, and that's why you just don't see those types of fatalities. But the lesson here is, and the question is valid, and probably even more important is, if we keep on seeing increases in measles, which we've, seen 150, 200 cases so far, that's a lot, right? That's a lot for the United States for February. Eventually somebody's going to die. It's if the numbers keep going up, it's eventually going to happen. And it's thoroughly unnecessary, right? It's totally unnecessary. There's no reason for that many measles cases, and there's no reason for a measles fatality in the United States of America or anywhere else for that matter if they were appropriately vaccinated. So just one final thought is, the measles vaccine was first licensed back in 1963, so 56 years ago. Even prior to the vaccine being on the market, the United States was averaging about 550,000 measles cases a year. and about 500 fatalities on an annual basis in the decade prior to the vaccine. So even back then, we weren't seeing the fatalities that they're seeing in Madagascar. So, our healthcare system was probably pretty decent back then, right? Even compared to modern day Madagascar. But yeah, point is, get you and yourself vaccinated against these incredibly contagious diseases. And what is it? 1 out of 1,000, something like that, can have some very serious complications and death. So we got to take this much more seriously than many people are. Well, some experts from the NIH and from the CDC, they were on Capitol Hill this week testifying about the threat of measles outbreaks here in the United States. And one of them was the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Of course, you know him as Dr. Anthony Fauci. He says, is it potentially deadly? Absolutely. Yep, that's an absolute. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And, lawmakers are looking, discussing the outbreak that's currently going on in the U.S., and it's being called a growing public health threat. Again, growing public health threat is accurate. Now, Dr. Nancy Messonnier, she's the director of the CDC's National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases, said most of the cases that we're seeing are in the unvaccinated communities. And she emphasizes, measles is so incredibly contagious. It can spread really quickly. So yes, we should be concerned. And again, absolutely right. We should be concerned. But, there were some people at the hearing that believes vaccinations may cause negative side effects. And a Representative Brett Guthrie, he's out of Kentucky, he asked a question to Dr. Messonnier. I believe I'm saying her name right. I'm not sure. I've heard some parents claim that measles vaccines can cause brain inflammation known as encephalitis. Is this true? And she answered, in healthy children, MMR vaccine does not cause brain swelling or encephalitis. Now, she did state that this could potentially happen to an unhealthy child, but of course, the parent should talk to the doctor about the child's personal risk for very rare side effects such as that. Another issue that, lawmakers, people on Capitol Hill were asking about was the concern about the spread of medically inaccurate information online concerning vaccines, in particular the measles vaccine. And as we see in the past week or so, a lot of the social media, internet sites, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all that, they're starting to working on banning a lot of these sites that are putting out this bogus information. And so Congress wanted to know whether addressing that misinformation might be a way to stop outbreaks before they start. And Fauci replied, we shouldn't be criticizing people who get this information that's false because they probably don't know it's false, right? We need to try and continue to educate them and to show them what the true evidence base is. And I was having this conversation with a friend at work today, and we were talking about this exact issue, is that the inaccurate anti-vaccine information is flooding. It's out there, and they're just doing this incredible job of marketing this poisonous idea, while the science community and health community are not doing the best job of explaining to patients, explaining to people, the public in general, what the true facts are, and talking to the public in in layman's terms and answering questions and not being critical of people that disagree, but trying to educate, right? Dr. Mezzanier said, vaccine hesitancy is the result of a misunderstanding of the risk and seriousness of disease, combined with the misinformation regarding the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. However, the specific issues fueling hesitancy varies by community. Because vaccine hesitancy remains a highly localized issue, the strategy to address these issues need to be local with support from the CDC. Totally agree. And it should start from parents talking to the pediatrician answering all the questions, and that's where you start. Strong immunization programs at the state and local levels are critical to understanding the specific issues and empowering local action. So I found that pretty interesting. I got that off of a CNN report. Apparently they spoke before Congress, Wednesday or so. Now, British Columbia, right? Vancouver up in the Northwest, just north of Washington State, up in Canada. They've been battling an outbreak in Vancouver, and as of Thursday, as of recording of this program, they had 13 confirmed cases. And the health minister up there, his name is Adrian Dix, says the province will require parents to register their children's immunization records at school by the fall, with all students in both public and private schools required to provide proof of immunization against measles and other diseases. So let's go ahead and take a listen to a clip concerning the situation up in British Columbia. Clip 1, Michael.
On the first day of school, bags are packed with fresh supplies and students are ready to take on another year. But come this September, they're also going to need proof of immunization.
That is what our top doctors are recommending. That is what Canadian Medical Association and our ministry is recommending, and that's what we're proceeding with.
Pressure has been mounting for the provincial government to act in the wake of the recent measles outbreak in Vancouver. This online petition calling for mandatory vaccines in BC has been gaining momentum with each of the 13 reported cases. But to be clear, the move to a mandatory registration program doesn't mean a child must be vaccinated. Instead, it puts together a standardized registry of the immunization records for every student.
This means that we can understand and respond much more quickly if we do have importations into schools in the province.
The provincial health officer and her predecessor first made recommendations back in 2014, following a massive outbreak in the Fraser Valley where 342 people were infected. The model is similar to Ontario's, where exemptions will exist for children who can't receive vaccines due to medical reasons, and if a parent does not want their child to be immunized because of philosophical reasons, there will be a protocol in place.
I do think there needs to be an education process, whether that's taking a module or having a structured discussion with a clinician, and then an official form signed that says you recognize the risks of not immunizing your child.
Immunized or not, all students will be able to attend school.
So this is the vaccine.
Still, it seems many are already a step ahead.
The demand has been exceedingly high. My wait list is in the order of about 80 to 100 patients right now.
It may have taken an outbreak to get that kind of response, but officials are hoping it's a sign of things to come.
I think the biggest thing is that we don't see these diseases, and when we do, we are reminded how significant they can be.
Kylie Stanton, Global News.
Yeah, so just to piggyback a little bit on what Dix had to say, we need to take some serious actions. What we want to do is go forward with systems that inform and ensure that nobody is not immunized because they forgot. Now, exemptions will exist for children who cannot receive vaccinations due to medical reasons. Absolutely reasonable, absolutely necessary, right? But if a parent does not want a child to receive an immunization because of philosophical reasons, he says that they would have to go through a process to state that. So it's interesting how British Columbia is handling it. They've only been going through the outbreak for a couple, 2-3 weeks now, and they're making moves reasonably quickly, right? And it's not as if this area hasn't had measles outbreaks in the past, right? In 2014, they saw about 350 cases. So they certainly don't want that to return. Sticking with Canada, saw a survey recently. It was a public opinion survey by an institute called the Angus Reid Institute. And it was concerning mandatory vaccinations in general, with the Canadian population. And just a few little stats that came out of it. About 1/5 of Canadians say that vaccination should be a parent's choice, but not mandatory. All right. But 70% of Canadians, the vast majority, say vaccinations against common deadly diseases should be a requirement for children entering school. 83% of Canadians surveyed said they would vaccinate their children without hesitation. However, another 29% are of the view that the science on vaccinations isn't quite clear. Right? There you go. There's a problem right there that if anybody's questioning that, then the scientific healthcare community hasn't been educating appropriately. And one last thing is 1/4 of Canadians say, about 26%, they are concerned about the risk of side effects for those being vaccinated. So that's a survey out of Canada, right into as the debate rages on in British Columbia, the Vancouver area, concerning mandatory vaccinations. Now, down here in the States, South Carolina, a pediatrician down in Myrtle Beach has made the news, and his pediatric office is not going to see patients who refuse to vaccinate anymore. Now, his name is Dr. Mark Behan, and he's with CPG Pediatrics in Myrtle Beach. And he said the office is going to start turning away unvaccinated patients under a newly established policy designed to protect patients. Having unvaccinated children coming into a pediatric office where lots of children are at a very high risk of contracting vaccine-related diseases just seems inappropriate. He said that to NBC News, the local station there in Myrtle Beach. He said that the new policy is necessary given the number of patients who are cared for at our office who suffer from weakened immune systems. Right? Quote, we have patients on chemotherapy with cancer. We have patients coming in here with severe congenital heart diseases. All of these patients can potentially die if they contract one of these vaccine preventable diseases. So yeah, I mean, that's just medicine 101, right? I mean, he's doing the right thing, but it has caused a little bit of an uproar in that community, with certain local parents, and we've been taking our child there forever, and now we can't take them anymore because they have to be vaccinated. Well, yeah. That's the rule. So good for Dr. Behan. Well-established rule there. In the state of Vermont, let me get his name real quick. His or her name. Mark Levine, MD. He's the Commissioner of Health in Vermont. He sent a letter to Congress. The committee that was discussing measles and vaccines that I previously talked about. And I want to read a couple portions of his letter. It says, as Vermont's commissioner charged with promoting and protecting the public health, I add my voice to those of my fellow health professionals and join the millions of Americans in support of a concerted effort measles to the ranks of the obscure diseases. Remember that, measles was eradicated in the U.S. just in 2000. So he goes on to say the MMR shot is very safe. Vaccines, like any medicine, have side effects. But most children who get the MMR shot have no side effects. Of the children who are not vaccinated and later contract measles, 3 out of 10 are hospitalized, and many suffer adverse effects. Measles can lead to pneumonia, lifelong brain damage, deafness, and for too many, death. And even the consequences for adults who contract measles, they can be also quite significant. He says that, the high rates of vaccination, building herd immunity, a topic we've talked on this show a number of times, are key to public health. Immunization rates are also critical for those who can't be vaccinated. And we're just piggybacking right on Dr. Behan's statement from South Carolina. People who are at risk of severe illness and complications from measles, such as infants and pregnant women and without evidence of measles immunity, and those with severely compromised immune systems, may come into contact with someone who's been exposed to measles. For these people, a chance encounter at a child care center, riding the train, or while grocery shopping can make the difference between life or death. And Dr. Levine also piggybacks on the other topic that's kind of hot in the news right now is the social media. And he writes, "It is unconscionable to me that information and opinion influencers such as social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram are not leaders in ensuring that credible, scientifically based information and resources are prioritized as part of their user experience algorithms. Misinformation and misleading information contribute to the modern day assault on science and evidence. It is a social responsibility of social media to prevent the spread of health-related misinformation and content." Right? Okay. Well, I had this conversation at work today too, and there's a lot of junk out there. There's no doubt a lot of junk. I mean, it's hard to compete with the anti-vaxxers and the mommy blogs and all that kind of stuff that are just spewing out a lot of junk. But and these are private entities, right? Facebook, YouTube, etc. But I struggle. I have to admit, I struggle with First Amendment issues also. But and that's all I'll say about that. I am struggling with that. I don't want to see junk science out there. However, trying to dictate what information can be out there, that's another thing. So I debate. I have an internal debate on that, and that's all I can say about that at this point. I don't want to get this to get too overly political. Let's take a look at it. But there's stuff going on in other countries too, and some serious stuff, right? And Japan is seeing their largest measles outbreak in a decade. And they've seen about 222 cases through the first 7-8 weeks of the year. And not only that, they're also battling rubella, an outbreak that's been going on since 2018. And they also see quite a bit of pertussis right now, too. There's a measles outbreak, I'll call it an epidemic in the Philippines that are just like wildfire, right? Over almost 13,000 cases through February 24th and over 200 fatalities. The regions that are really hit hard is the main Metro Manila area, the capital area, Calabarzon, Central Luzon, Western Visayas, and Northern Mindanao. Those 5 regions account for about 7 out of 10 cases. And thousands of patients were unvaccinated. And then in Ukraine, and this just is a continuation from previous years also, right? Last year they saw about 54,000 cases. They've already saw 21,000 cases since January 1st. So Ukraine continues their battle with measles. All right. Again, the website, outbreaknewstoday.com, outbreaknewstoday.com. And after the break, we'll talk a little bit more about vaccines, hepatitis A, and some other topics. I'll see you then.
Outbreak News This Week, your source for all the news about worms and germs. Here's your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Well, welcome back to the program. I was having a conversation with my mom last weekend, and it's not the first time I've heard this story, but she was telling me the story of, we were talking about vaccines and some of the outbreaks, and because I can remember when I was a kid, back in the 40s and 50s, and people would be in lines going around the block waiting in line for the polio vaccine, right? And you would see pictures of people, that had polio, which was reasonably common, and the crippling paralysis, people ending up in iron lungs. I mean, nobody wanted that. And when other vaccines came out, it was somewhat similar, right? So, well, to piggyback on that, there was this article in Fortune magazine by a guy named Bruce Gellin. He's the president of global immunization at the Sabin Vaccine Institute. And I wanted to read some portions of this to you because it's pretty important. And of course, he talks about the elimination of measles in the U.S. and how it's, we're seeing these renewed outbreaks, right? We're seeing them in Washington, Oregon, New York, and of course overseas, Europe and the Philippines, Japan, etc. He says, amidst this resurgence, the recent declaration by the World Health Organization that vaccine hesitancy is among the top 10 global health threats should be a cause for alarm. We need to keep more sparks from becoming uncontrollable fires, right? We kind of have an uncontrollable fire in Ukraine and in the Philippines. So, in other words, he says, we need to better understand and reverse the trend of vaccine hesitancy. Now, when vaccines first came to prominence as an essential for public health, the harm caused by contagious diseases and fear they invoked were highly effective in educating parents and the public about the need to invest in vaccine research and the value of immunization. In the 1900s, for example, polio viruses in the U.S. crippled more than 50,000 people, resulting in the death of several thousands. Parents lived in fear that their children would be infected next, and public swimming pools and movie theaters, summer camps were closed. In the absence of a vaccine, these public health measures, coupled with hope and prayer, were of limited value, but the only ones available at the time, right? So the fear of the disease was so widespread that the nation quickly rallied around efforts to find a vaccine to fight the scourge. When the March of Dimes undertook the grassroots efforts to fund research to develop a vaccine against the disease, the White House received more than 80,000 letters containing dimes and dollars to support the research. And back then, the president was FDR, who himself had polio. Scientists committed to the development of polio vaccines like Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin found similar support. When Salk's laboratory produced a vaccine that was ready to be tested, for instance, parents readily volunteered their healthy children. The so-called polio pioneers, a group of 650,000, for the opportunity to receive the still experimental vaccine, and more than 1 million served as controls in a national experiment to determine the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. Fast forward to 2019. Measles has returned, but there exists an environment of vaccine hesitancy that threatens to reverse the gains of immunization programs in the U.S. and around the world. We can blame the anti-vaccine activists, conspiracy theorists, and the like who have used the internet and social media platforms to disseminate misinformation and disinformation regarding the safety and importance of immunization. It's even possible that Russian bots played a role, right? Clearly, there's a need to investigate and reveal the political, financial, and personal motivations of those who intentionally distort the facts, while also ramping up our efforts to limit the spread of this false information. But what it really comes down to, and again, it's piggybacking on previous conversations from today, of all the things that we can do, the best thing is, we need better and more visible communication and education about vaccines from those who develop, advocate for, and provide vaccinations. Yeah, wise words from Bruce Gellin, that's for sure. Very wise. All right, let me get away from the measles and that for a little bit and talk about another outbreak that's, really kind of quietly. You don't hear you hear news, but it's not. You hear a lot more news about measles, of course, much more rapidly contagious. But since I don't know, mid 2016. Sometime in 2017, we've been seeing hepatitis outbreaks in a number of states. And with the addition of New Hampshire as being the latest one that's declared an outbreak, there's 17 states right now. 1/3 of the country is experiencing or had experienced a hepatitis A outbreak, including here in the state of Florida. So there was this report that I saw about Kentucky, and Kentucky is, bar none, the hardest hit state, right? They've got about 4,300 hepatitis A cases, and 43 deaths. Can you imagine that? 43 hepatitis A fatalities in Kentucky. And looking at this report, last spring, Kentucky's infectious disease chief was ringing the alarm, right? And the author of this article saying, this guy's saying, hey, we got an issue here. And Kentucky, this was a couple years ago, and Kentucky is, according to the author, too low and too slow of this response, right? Now, a hepatitis A outbreak had already infected nearly 400 people in Louisville was seeping into Appalachia, where rampant drug addiction provided fuel for the virus to explode across rural Kentucky. To contain it, the drug users and homeless largely spreading the disease had to be vaccinated, and quickly. But the challenges in impoverished rural Kentucky were huge. Drug users were hard to find and vaccinate. Thinly staffed county health departments had seen their budgets shrink, and federal vaccine money for Kentucky had run out. We need to move faster, urged Dr. Robert Brawley in April 2018 in an email to state health department colleagues. The virus is moving faster than we and local health departments are immunizing people at risk. Brawley argued that a powerful state response was needed, $10 million, including $6 million for a fusillade of 150,000 vaccines and a $4 million for temporary health workers to help administer them. In the email, he also lobbied for a public health emergency declaration to bolster the case for more federal money. But the Courier-Journal, the local paper there, their investigation found that these urgent pleas went nowhere. And in the months that followed, Kentucky's outbreak metastasized into the nation's largest and deadliest. The Courier-Journal found that Brawley's boss, 31-year-old acting public health commissioner Jeffrey Howard, rejected his aggressive recommendations. Amid limited state budgets, county staffing constraints, and the availability of more than $220 million in local health department reserve funds, he stuck to, instead, a $3 million state response. Now, the state eventually sent $2.2 million to local health departments and declined to declare an emergency. In addition, county health departments added little or no staff to increase efforts to find and vaccinate drug users and homeless people. In addition, Kentucky officials never even tried strategies that were being used by some of the other, outbreak states who also fought outbreaks with limited budgets. Kentucky didn't seek money from the state legislature like Michigan. It didn't deploy strike teams of state health workers to counties like Indiana did. And it just waited much longer to deploy state funds than Tennessee. When Tennessee's outbreak started, they earmarked $3 million after just 25 cases, right? Tennessee's got, 900 right now. So yeah, it's a big situation up there, and health departments are strapped, and I get that. But, I guess the point here is, were the best choices made? Well, I'm going to hear from a health department employee in one of the rural counties of Kentucky in this next clip. So let's take a listen to clip 2.
For the younger generation, they keep going ahead and shooting up with all these needles and using the same needle and sharing. And I'm telling you, if you sit and watch your child die like we watched my child and her brother die, they would be standing in line to get something done, because it's one of the most horrible deaths that you'll ever go through. I promise. It's nothing. I've never seen nothing like it. Struggle that he put up. He was tough. But you've got to be educated, and there've got to be some kind of needle exchange come up somewhere, because it's so, people don't realize, I don't think, how bad this is.
All right, let's switch gears to another public health situation, very sad public health situation. That's the issue with congenital syphilis. Right? Starting in Arizona, right? Arizona last year saw 53 congenital syphilis cases last year, including 10 babies that died. And this is a pretty dramatic increase from previous years. And then Maricopa County, that's the county that houses Phoenix, accounted for 30 of these cases and 5 fatalities. Now, according to the Maricopa County Health Department, the county is almost 60% higher than the national average and has beat the average for the last decade as far as congenital syphilis. A horrible stat to have, right? The increase in congenital syphilis is directly attributed to an increase in syphilis among both men and women, and a failure to screen for syphilis during pregnancy, said Dr. Rebecca Sunenshine. She's the medical director for the Maricopa County Public Health Department. That is why it's vital that physicians pay attention to the screening requirements, testing at the first prenatal visit, and again at the 3rd trimester and birth. The only way we will reduce these community rates is with these aggressive screening and treatment techniques. And treatment is actually quite simple. Syphilis can be treated and cured with just penicillin, right? It's one of the few infectious diseases you can still treat with penicillin. Okay, well, it's not only in Maricopa County, but if we go north of the border, a place that you don't normally think of as a syphilis haven, but Manitoba, Canada. And they're reporting, the Manitoba Health Department is reporting 10 infants treated for congenital syphilis in just the past 6 months. They say that, the bulk of the cases are going on in Winnipeg and the northern health regions. And the number of pregnant women diagnosed with syphilis is rising, with more than 10 infants treated for congenital syphilis in 6 months. Lack of prenatal care and substance abuse have been identified as factors in these situations. So, yeah, and this is just a horrible, again, really preventable disease. And then on Wednesday, the World Health Organization puts out these new estimates on congenital syphilis, on a global scale. And I gotta say, I had no clue that these numbers were what they are, right? And they write, new estimates published today show that there were more than 500,000, around 661,000 total cases of congenital syphilis in 2016, resulting in over 200,000 stillbirths and neonatal deaths. Yeah. Had no idea it was just that prevalent. That really did shock me. So the World Health Organization is pointing it out. Health departments here in the U.S. are pointing it out, and we're talking about some serious stuff, right? And I interviewed Dr. A. Meshadalja a couple of years ago about congenital syphilis. I want to play this little clip about him talking about the disease a little bit, just to give you some information on it if you're unaware of it. And if we can play clip number 3, Mike.
Now, most people know that syphilis is a serious bacterial infection that is transmitted primarily through sexual contact. However, not everyone knows about congenital syphilis. So what is it, and how does the baby become infected?
Well, what congenital syphilis is when a developing baby develops the infection as it's transmitted from an infected mother. So a pregnant woman may have syphilis, become infected with syphilis during her pregnancy, and then transmit it to the developing fetus. And then that fetus is then infected with the bacteria that causes syphilis, and it can lead to very severe problems, including as severe as stillbirth, which you mentioned earlier.
Right. Now some of the other horrible effects of congenital syphilis that are not fatal, what are they?
Well, it's a spectrum, and you have to remember syphilis is, they call it the great pretender because it can affect many different organ systems in a body. So somebody with congenital syphilis a baby could have anything ranging from, they could be born with a rash, they could be born with an enlarged liver, they could be born with jaundice, they can have bone abnormalities, they can have, basically any organ system can be affected by syphilis. So there's a wide range of manifestations in a baby that's born with congenital syphilis. So that's why it's such a dangerous disease, because any organ system can be infected, and it can be something that really presents with other types of symptoms, and you have to think this baby has congenital syphilis because testing wasn't done during pregnancy. So you really have to think about everything when you think about syphilis, because this bacteria is so able to affect all parts of a body.
Now, this is all treatable and preventable, isn't it?
Right. Congenital syphilis is something that shouldn't really occur. What should stop it is testing of people for syphilis at the first prenatal visit, and then in high-risk patients throughout the pregnancy if there's continued possible exposure to syphilis. So this is something that we can easily control and had controlled for a while, but it's starting to kind of slip away.
And can you just mention what the treatment is?
Usually it's a course of antibiotics. Penicillin is the standard treatment that you do, and it depending upon the stage of syphilis that someone is diagnosed with, the duration of the penicillin may vary.
Well, in some more news north of the border, there's a big lawsuit going on in Canada from soldiers that have been deployed overseas and were given the anti-malarial drug Mefloquine. And a lot of them are claiming a lot of really adverse situations, like psychiatric type situations and like that. And it's sad to listen to them, but this is what they're saying. And there's a big lawsuit going on up there. Clip number 4, Mike.
That I was having temporal lobe seizures caused by mefloquine toxicity, everything made sense all of a sudden.
It's a controversial anti-malarial drug once commonly prescribed to Canadian soldiers, and many say they've had long-term and debilitating side effects from Mefloquine. Well, now a law firm is crossing the country to prep for a lawsuit against the Canadian government.
My anxiety is so bad I hardly leave the house anymore. In fact, the fact that I'm even here right now took a lot of people and support.
Christian McCurkin calls the anti-malaria pills he had no choice but to take while serving as a peacekeeper in Congo a monster. He was medically released from the military for PTSD, but he now says his symptoms come from brain damage caused by Mefloquine.
Home from Yugoslavia for 2 years and had been under fire and had never had a panic attack before I took this drug. It's been 25 years of hell.
Now, packaging for the drug outlines the risk for side effects, but soldiers are saying in the 90s they had no choice but to take it, and inadequate instruction on when to stop using it. Today, McCurkin was one of many in Edmonton hearing from a Toronto law firm about a mass tort lawsuit against the government. The representative plaintiff served in Somalia.
Hypervigilant and anxious all the time, more ramped up. I felt more aggressive, more ramped up than I should have been. A lot of us were like that.
While there, John Dow witnessed what would be called the Somalia affair, where a Somali teen was beaten to death by 2 Canadian soldiers. Dow blames Mefloquine.
Seeing Master Corporal Clayton Natchy in a florid psychosis, he was hallucinating about camel spiders that weren't there.
The lawyers for the case say they've been in contact with around 600 people who say they're experiencing side effects from the drug.
Who feel so violated by having to take this medication, and now so many of their lives are in ruins.
Now, earlier in the week, I reached out to the Department of National Defense to get an interview. They didn't have anyone available to talk on camera, but they did answer some questions by email. They pointed to a 2017 Surgeons General review that found no long-term effects on human health, while also saying while the drug is used in some cases today, it is no longer the #1 choice. But what these soldiers want is more support from the federal government and an acknowledgement of what this drug did to them.
Their futures have been destroyed. So many of them can't work, and that our veterans deserve way better treatment.
Now, this is the second of the Cross Canada town halls, and the law firm says they hope to have the first of their cases hitting the courts in the coming months. From Edmonton's Kingsway Legion, Carly Robinson, City News.
Okay, so just to go over a little bit about this particular drug, and this is from the CDC. Mefloquine is an anti-malarial medicine. It is available in the U.S. by prescription only. It is available as a generic medicine and used to be sold under the brand name Lariam. It can be prescribed for either treatment or prevention of malaria. So who can take Mefloquine? Mefloquine can be prescribed to adults and children of all ages, they say. It can be safely taken by pregnant women during all trimesters of pregnancy and nursing mothers. So who should not take Mefloquine? People with psychiatric conditions, including active depression, a recent history of depression, generalized anxiety disorder, psychosis, schizophrenia, and other major psychiatric disorders should not take Mefloquine. In addition, people with seizure disorders like epilepsy, certain heart conditions like an irregular heartbeat should not take the drug. So, yeah, that's what the CDC is talking about. Let's see if they got anything else that's worth mentioning, because there's, here's the thing. What are some of the potential side effects? Most people do not experience significant side effects when taking Mefloquine. However, for those persons that do experience side effects, they can be unpleasant, unsettling. Dizziness, difficulty sleeping, anxiety, vivid dreams, visual disturbances, in rare instances, seizures, depression, psychosis. So there's a lot of some brutal side effects that come along with this drug, right from the CDC's mouth. So Anyway, so we'll see what goes on with that court case up in Canada, and see how that turns out. I'm quite interested in that. All right, and again, I want to remind you to visit the website outbreaknewstoday.com. Outbreaknewstoday.com. You see, there's some whooping cough outbreak going on in Los Angeles. It's something you might want to check out. And I'm going to wrap it up at that point. And I will see you next week on Outbreak News This Week. Good day. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Outbreak News This Week with Robert Harriman. If you missed any part of today's program, you can listen to the podcast anytime on our website, outbreaknewstoday.com. Make sure to join us here next week for Outbreak News This Week with Robert Harriman.